northern areas. So for central and northern Scotland, here it is a chilly start to the day with showers arriving, particularly for northern and western Scotland, along with a brisk breeze with gales to the far northwest. Snow falling above 300 or 400 metres. Northern Ireland, meanwhile, southern Scotland, northern England stays cloudy and in places fairly damp, particularly northwest England. But to the south again, across much of the rest of England, much of Wales, brighter skies, even some sunshine coming through. And where we get some sunshine, 14 Celsius is possible. And actually that weather front remains in place more or less throughout Tuesday evening, but eventually during Tuesday night it starts to push south, initially into North Wales, northwest England, some heavier bursts of rain for a time before the rain peters out as it pushes into South Wales, the Midlands, by the end of the night. To the south, 9 Celsius, so another mild night to come. But to the north, clearer spells for northern England, Northern Ireland, Scotland as well. And it turns progressively colder in Scotland. So initially snow falling to 400 metres, eventually snow perhaps falling to the surface across northern Scotland and certainly settling above 200 metres for the likes of the West Highlands. Meanwhile, there will be some sunshine away from the showers for Northern Ireland, Northern England and increasingly the Midlands into Wales as well as colder, brighter air filters southwards. 12 Celsius though for London under a lot of cloud on Wednesday, but those brighter skies by the end of Thursday affect most of us and Friday's looking bright but on the cold side.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on TV and on radio. I'll be bringing you all the latest from Westminster, including Keir Starmer's vicious mob yesterday where he was attacked by those people outside of Parliament. We'll also be talking about Ukraine, the Prime Minister's position and online pornography. All that and more, but first, it's your morning headlines.
A very good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister's facing renewed calls to apologise for his claim that Sir Keir Starmer failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile. The Labour leader was targeted by protesters in Westminster yesterday. Police officers escorted him through a crowd of COVID lockdown protesters and then bundled him into a car. One protester repeatedly accused him of protecting paedophiles. Boris Johnson has warned the Russian President Vladimir Putin Britain will not flinch as tensions between Russia and Ukraine continue. Writing in The Times, the Prime Minister says he's considering dispatching RAF Typhoon fighters and Royal Navy warships to support the NATO defence alliance. Well, it comes after President Biden threatened to halt completion of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline connecting Russia and Germany. Pornography sites will soon be legally required to verify the age of their users under new rules. The online safety bill is going to require companies to put robust checks in place to stop children accessing harmful content. If websites don't comply, ministers say that Ofcom will be able to fine sites up to 10% of their annual global turnover or block them in the UK. Women with an aggressive form of womb cancer could get access to new immunotherapy treatment on the NHS. Most women with endometrial cancer die within a year of diagnosis. A new drug, Gempril, is being billed as the first development in this area of medicine since the introduction of chemotherapy. Now, a new government study suggests energy drinks could be harmful to children. The drinks are being linked to headaches, trouble sleeping and stomach problems. 1 in 3 young people drink caffeinated energy drinks. There are now calls to ban their sale to anyone under 18. You're up to date now here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Now, let's go back to Tom for the briefing.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, as we've all seen, opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer faced a horrific mob outside Parliament yesterday, having to be bundled into a police car to escape the baying crowd of great unwashed anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theorists and various troublemakers. This troubling scene just months after an MP was brutally killed. There are no words to describe how gut-wrenching it is to think that any human beings think that sort of behaviour is in any way acceptable. It was the kind of spectacle that no politician or indeed journalist should have to endure. That, I hope, is a fact upon which we can all be agreed. Yet bizarrely this morning, much of the media, in a state of inexplicable groupthink, is running with the idea that it might have been the Prime Minister who's to blame. That it's Boris Johnson who incited this hateful mob. Really? Well, let's check the facts on this one. The people behind this were the same pathetic mob often seen traipsing around Westminster, which yesterday spawned from a rabble that first gathered outside Downing Street. It then moved on to Parliament Square in order to, in the words of the protest organisers, end all jab programmes in the UK and the world, end COVID regulations and police bill attacks on rights, and take down the government and what it describes as the fake opposition. Yes, take down the government and the opposition, with not one mention of Jimmy Savile. That was their advert. These were troublemakers who organised a loopy gatherings primarily to protest vaccinations and to, in their words, take down those in positions of authority. This was an anti-vax protest, yet not so much of the media. One of the most read newspapers in the country, the Metro, led this morning with Boris Johnson was last night accused of endangering Sir Keir Starmer's life after the Labour leader was surrounded by a mob shouting that he protected paedophiles such as Jimmy Savile. Not one mention of vaccines. And The Independent went with Boris Johnson was last night urged to apologise after Sir Keir Starmer was targeted by an abusive mob repeating last week's Jimmy Savile smear. Again, not mentioning they were anti-vaxxers. Almost all of the coverage talks of this as if it's a protest exercised by Savile, not by vaccines. But I've scoured the various videos of this incident, and it appears to me that just one member of the mob shouted anything at all about Jimmy Savile. On many of the videos, that slur can't even be heard. Most of the big cries were of traitor, some nonsense about the Magna Carta, Julian Assange, and what they called the New World Order. This was a rabble of lunatics. Sure, one of the screams hurled was about Savile, but most were about a vast array of other things. Is anyone seriously suggesting that had the Savile row not taken place last week, that this collection of COVID radicalised anti-vax nut jobs would simply have ignored the leader of the opposition, would have quietly and politely nodded as he went by? What planet are these journalists on? The organisational poster for this protest spoke not about Jimmy Savile, but about, quote, taking down the government and the opposition over COVID. That's why they were there. And anyone who's spent any time at all in Westminster will know that these are precisely the same people who have hounded any journalist or politician that they're vaguely able to recognise for months on end now. The BBC's Nick Watt was hounded by exactly the same people in June, with the same screams of traitor and scum. And a month later, I was on the receiving end of these same screams too, including the attack these QAnon conspiracy-inspired lunatics throw at anyone they deem to be of the establishment, as a pedo protector. Yes, that jibe has been in their limited vocabulary for quite some time now. So is it really credible to suggest that had the row over Jimmy Savile not taken place last week, that this unruly mob would have simply ignored the leader of the opposition, would have stood back politely, would have hurled no abuse? In my view, to suggest anything of the sort would be to give these lowlives far too much credit. Again, most of the screams from this crowd of cretins were of traitor Magna Carta and Julian Assange. The idea that these morons amassed because of a comment about the CPS prosecution record made at the dispatch box of the House of Commons last week is to stretch credibility beyond the bounds of reasonable logic. And to say the blame lies with the Prime Minister, not with those actually hurling the wide array of abusive screams, is to let that mob off far too lightly. These anti-vax protesters loathe nothing more than Boris Johnson's government in general, and its successful vaccination programme in particular. In my view, this is an issue where sense and rationality have been thrown out the window, and where a narrative that suits some politically, but in reality is entirely light on logic, has been allowed to take hold amongst most of the media. Groupthink is never edifying, especially when it is so evidently incorrect. Stop. Think. Do better. Well, let's discuss this all now with Paul Connew, a media commentator and former editor of the Sunday Mirror. Welcome to the programme, Paul. I'm really keen to get your perspective on this now. The Daily Mirror, granted not the Sunday Mirror, has this morning the headline, "This is why words matter, this is why truth matters." Is it your view that the Prime Minister is to some extent culpable in this situation?
Your words exactly, Tom, to some extent. I'm sure that this mob of cretins had several reasons and weren't there solely because of what happened with Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer over Jimmy Savile. But they certainly wouldn't have even been introducing Jimmy Savile's name or accusing Keir Starmer of being a paedophile protector if the events of last week in Parliament, which were disgraceful by Boris Johnson, hadn't really happened. Boris should actually follow the advice of some of the more decent and measured minds in the Tory party and apologise, which would be the normal thing to do for a Prime Minister who had made a blatantly false statement and assertion in the House of Commons. And on the subject of Savile, Boris Johnson has form, which Keir Starmer, to his credit, hasn't yet mentioned, but which maybe an MP tomorrow and a PMQ's might do. When the police were investigating Jimmy Savile after his death, and when Theresa May, as Home Secretary, set up the ongoing child sex abuse public inquiry, Boris Johnson described that as variously as piffle and spaffing money up the wall. So I think Boris Johnson certainly should be apologising to Sir Keir Starmer publicly in the House of Commons and withdrawing that wild smear he committed last Monday.
Now, of course, these protesters have been haranguing and harassing people outside Parliament for many months now. Is it your view that they wouldn't have harassed Keir Starmer if this comment wasn't made, or indeed that they
might well have done if
the Prime Minister?
If Starmer had crossed their path, but they certainly wouldn't have been hurling Jimmy Savile's name, or accusing him of being a paedophile protector. That's the point. So to that extent,
are you sure on that
Boris
point?
Johnson...
Because I was standing outside Westminster in July, and I was called a paedophile protector. Is this not just a generic?
But Tom, you're not the Prime Minister, and you didn't issue a dangerous and false smear in the House of Commons.
Is this not something that these groups often say? And to relate what the Prime Minister said about the record of the DPP to these general smears, when, of course, the Prime Minister has clarified what he said, is that not worth something?
Yes, he has belatedly, under pressure, clarified, hasn't fully withdrawn, and certainly hasn't apologised, although that doesn't surprise me, because in both over the years I've known Boris, in his personal life and his public life, sorry is a word that isn't in the Johnson lexicon. And I think it's shameful if he does not formally apologise and withdraw his assertion of last Monday in the House of Commons tomorrow at PMQ. But I wouldn't hold my breath.
It will be a fascinating PMQs to watch. It seems like every single week PMQs gets more of a box office event. How Keir Starmer will phrase questions to Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be very, very interesting. But for now, Paul Connew, thank you for talking us through those issues this morning on The Briefing. Well, let's get more on this now with the Conservative MP for Bassetlaw, Brendan Clark-Smith, someone who knows Westminster well, who's seen these protesters gathering around the gates of Parliament for quite some time now. Brendan, in your view, were these protesters inspired by the Prime Minister or not?
Good morning, Tom. I think you summed it up very well before. I don't think this is actually anything to do with the Prime Minister whatsoever. Now, I caught the train in today from Retford, where I live, and I had a couple of these protesters there, and they were talking about me being sent to Nuremberg for trial, and it was all about COVID and various other conspiracy theories. So these people are always around Parliament anyway. Whether it's protesting about 5G towers or Bill Gates is taking over the world or whatever it is. So I don't think there's anything at all to do with what the Prime Minister said last week. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition has gone by, David Lammy's gone by, and there's been some appalling abuse, which I completely condemn. But what you'll notice, as you know yourself, Tom, is this kind of abuse, it happens all the time to politicians and journalists around Westminster. It's happened to Nick Watt, it's happened to yourself, it's happened to me. You have people like Steve Bray standing there with a megaphone shouting abuse at MPs all the time as well. So this is the culture around Parliament, sadly, and thankfully we're changing the law and going to put a stop to a lot of this.
Well, we are talking at a time where it's less than 4 months since one of your colleagues was brutally killed while conducting a constituency surgery. Are we talking enough about how we respond to intimidating mobs like this? Should these people, and we recognise some of those faces in that video that were haranguing Keir Starmer. Certainly one of them was one of the same people that was haranguing the BBC journalist Nick Watt in June. These people who repeatedly intimidate and harass politicians and journalists, should we potentially be saying that they shouldn't be allowed to hover around Parliament?
I think it's important that people have got the right to protest and get their views across, and that's something I'll always defend, Tom, and I think Parliament is a better place for letting that happen. But when you're getting people constantly camped out there, constantly with the same abuse, we saw the Winston Churchill statue vandalised, at what point do we actually say that this is unacceptable, really? I think most reasonable people will understand where to draw the line. I think a lot of viewers at home maybe haven't visited Parliament and maybe not seen for themselves that this is a fairly regular thing. So I think when it's actually abuse and there's physical intimidation there, then a line is crossed, and I think the police should step in at that point. But we need to give them the powers to be able to do that, of course.
And I suppose you're there referring to the police bill, which is one of the things that this particular group of protesters were protesting against as well in their original invitation to stand outside Number 10 and to go to Parliament Square. What is it particularly within the police bill that would be able to assuage some of the more raucous protests like this one?
Well, I think if you look at Insulate Britain and so on, and people gluing themselves to public transport, I think particularly where people are blocking bridges so people can't get to hospital and so on, and it enables police really to get people shifted a lot easier than it would do before. I mean, we're not giving the authorities some sort of charter to just, hit someone over the head and throw them in a van. It's not like that. But what it does do is allows the police to use their common sense and their discretion a bit more without the constant threat of being sued all the time. And of course, these protesters are very good at talking about their rights, but they, of course, forget about the rights of the people which they impinge upon.
Well, Brendan Clark-Smith, thank you very much for talking through those issues and the particular nuisance that persistently exists around Westminster, it seems, and has been there for quite some time. Thank you for joining us on the briefing this morning. Well, now on to international affairs, because French President Emmanuel Macron met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow yesterday to reach a solution between NATO and the Kremlin. At a news conference following the talks, Macron said the coming days would be crucial and is set to meet today with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kiev. And of course, the Prime Minister today is meeting with the Lithuanian leadership as well. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Russia expert Keir Giles of Chatham House. Welcome to the programme. Macron is really getting involved here, and he's told people that the West needs to understand Russia more. Is that leaning towards capitulation?
Well, that is what everybody is worried about. Now, Macron has gone to Moscow saying that he can bridge this apparently unbridgeable gap between what Russia wants from Europe and what Europe can actually give him. And the suspicion is that the only way he can do that is by offering President Putin someone or something to make this Russian military escalation near Ukraine go away. And it's alarming that President Putin has said that some of the proposals that Macron has made to him in private are actually something he can work on. So that's very concerning for people who have looked at this situation from Eastern Europe, the people we're talking about over their heads, worrying exactly what it is that Macron wants out of this, over and above, of course, some kind of foreign policy victory to take forward to his own re-election in France.
Macron himself is under considerable pressure with two challenges to him on the far left with Jean-Luc Mélenchon and on the far right with Marine Le Pen, saying that they would withdraw from NATO and France pursue a much more isolationist policy. Is that informing what Macron's doing here?
Possibly. But, of course, let's not forget that Macron himself has been very friendly towards Russia. In fact, they're joking now about France being the last surviving member of the Warsaw Pact in Europe. Macron has been pushing for a reset with Russia, re-establishing the relationships, and, of course, now he's talking about re-establishing the European security order, understanding what Russia's concerns are. But all of that, of course, overlooks the fact that when Russia talks about security guarantees for itself, which is the root of everything that it's demanding from Europe at the moment, if you look at the small print, it's actually more about taking those guarantees away from everybody else. At the press conference yesterday, Putin was hammering home this idea that all of this is about Ukraine not joining NATO, which overlooks the fact that that's not what it's about. This is not a Ukraine issue. It's actually rolling back the frontiers of Western protection of those countries in Eastern Europe against Russia.
So taking this to Britain now, where does this leave us? The Prime Minister speaking to the leaders of some Baltic countries today, more troops being promised to go to Eastern Europe as well. Does Macron's manoeuvring here, where does that leave the British situation?
Well, we're told that Macron has actually coordinated what he has gone to Moscow with, for example, the US, the UK. But it still seems the UK is actually in a leadership position now in Europe because it can pursue this firm policy of standing up to Russia while the EU is not even at the negotiating table. And that, of course, is directly relevant for those countries that are bordering Russia at the moment. And that's where British support will be felt most of all. It's not only supplying defensive weapons directly to Ukraine to raise the cost of any potential Russian invasion, but also looking to that second line of defense. If Russia does attack Ukraine, then that's a huge problem for all of the countries that border it as well. And those are the countries, those including the ones within NATO, that the UK will want to be bolstering now to make sure that we're not faced with exactly the same problem a few months down the road, only closer to home.
Well, Keir Giles, thank you so much for your analysis this morning. It is a situation that does seem to be rumbling on and may well not reach any conclusion anytime soon. We watch with interest. Keir Giles of Chatham House, thank you very much for joining us today. Well, now, the government is announcing today what it describes as world-leading measures to protect children from accessing pornography online. This means that there'll be age verification checks that are brought forward where you'll have to put in a passport or a credit card number in order to access online pornography. It's an interesting proposal, one that I believe has been pursued in Germany, but one that has worried a lot of civil liberties voices in the United Kingdom. Well, let's talk about this proposal from the government and indeed safety online in general with Will Gardner now, who is director of the UK Safer Internet Centre. Welcome to the programme. First of all, is it really a safer internet if we're all going to be asked to give credit card details to what might not be the most wholesome companies in the world in order to access explicit material online?
Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me on. So today is Safer Internet Day. There's a lot of talk about online safety right across the UK in schools. We hope parents and children will be having conversations about how to help support kids be safe online today. The government has brought out this announcement about this rule, and look, we're absolutely in favour of it. We see it as carrying across the same protections that you would have in the offline world, where it isn't possible for children to buy or to access such content without those checks, just carrying them straight over into the online space. So we are absolutely supportive of that. The issues you talk about around passport controls and privacy, I think that's an important issue. And this was a policy, you might remember, that nearly made it across the line a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
There are steps in place where
it was shut down a couple of years ago because it was deemed to be unworkable. There were concerns that children would be forced into dangerous corners of the internet. Children are very, very good, as I'm sure you're aware, of avoiding various firewalls and blocks and protections. And potentially the worry is that far from this making it safer online, people under the age of 18 will actually be forced into places like the dark web to access material that we know they access.
That's not what is going to happen. This rule will prevent accidental exposure to young people to this type of content, and we know the majority of young people who come across this content do it unintentionally. There's research that backs that up. So that is what this rule is there to help protect those children who are not wanting to look at pornography but end up looking at it. For those children who want to look at it, that's a different conversation, and this is not a piece of legislation which will necessarily be the way to protect children from that. So this is protection from the accidental exposure, and we know that is a really significant issue.
It does seem to me to be a little bit of overreach. Isn't it better to have these conversations in schools, to use mechanisms like Safer Internet Day to foster a culture of safer internet practice, rather than some pretty heavy-handed and potentially counterproductive government interventions?
I don't see it that way at all. I don't think it's an either-or. I absolutely agree that we need to start... the conversations are happening about supporting children in schools so they can, if they do come across this content, they should understand it for what it is. It is pornography. It is not reality. This is not, where the concerns are that young people think this is how normal sexual relations are. This is what normal human bodies look like. There's some really important issues that we want to try and make sure we are equipping children with.
Well, Will Gardner, that is very important, and very important to have that educational aspect there. I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme, but thank you so much for coming on and providing your perspective. That's it today for The Briefing. Catch me again tomorrow morning at 9:30, but also catch me in a few minutes' time, because it's To The Point with Mercy Muroki and me filling in for Patrick Christie's today. But first, it's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. A mild start for most of us, bright for many actually throughout much of today, but a lingering zone of cloud and rain will affect parts of northern England, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. Here's the weather front responsible. It's dividing the country today between mild but cloudy southern parts, brighter but colder northern areas. So for central and northern Scotland, here it is a chilly start to the day with showers arriving, particularly for northern and western Scotland, along with a brisk breeze with gales to the far northwest. Snow falling above 300 or 400 metres. Northern Ireland, meanwhile, southern Scotland, northern England stays cloudy and in places fairly damp, particularly northwest England. But to the south again, across much of the rest of England, much of Wales, brighter skies, even some sunshine coming through. And where we get some sunshine, 14 Celsius is possible. And actually that weather front remains in place more or less throughout Tuesday evening, but eventually during Tuesday night it starts to push south, initially into North Wales, northwest England, some heavier bursts of rain for a time before the rain peters out as it pushes into South Wales, the Midlands by the end of the night. To the south, 9 Celsius, so another